tuned into InvisiYouth Chat Sessions, a video podcast series. Our episode starts right now. Here's your host, Dominique Vale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the InvisiYouth Chat Sessions, where you can check in for your dose of stigma-breaking, humor-filling, motivation-loving life hacks and motivational tips for all of the medically adultish people in life. I'm Dominique Vale, founder of InvisiYouth and host of the InvisiYouth Chat Sessions, and today is episode 39 of Season 3B. We are in our last two episodes of Season 3B, and we will get a normal number in 2022 when we pick up for Season 4, I promise. So for today's topic, I'm really excited because this is one that since we started InvisiYouth Chat Sessions, we have gotten many DMs about. This is something my team has wanted and myself to have a full episode covering. So I'm really looking forward to getting a full episode to dive deep on this with everyone. We're going to be talking all things about grief, bereavement, and how the topic can really uniquely impact our young adult community in the chronic illness and disability space. So now don't worry, everybody, this episode is going to be typical InvisiYouth flavor. I promise this is not going to be melancholy. Don't pause your video and go, I'm going to pick a different one. I swear. We like to bring our flair of joy and realness to it, so you will enjoy. And that is a big reason is because of my special guest as well. I know you guys know there's such a large misconception about grief and bereavement and the topic of talking about death, especially for the chronic illness community. I know that from my own experience, and so many of you talk about it quite a bit, that it's either pigeonholed for terminal or life-threatening illness in that conversation, or we're always geared to not talk about death or grief because we're pushing and exerting our energy outside of our recovery and our health. So for InvisiYouth, it's really important that we not only bring the conversation forward, but really kind of push through all those taboos and stigmas that are around it to make it more comfortable for everybody. And so that that conversation can be going, and then also providing that support for one another that so many of us find in the virtual space and also in our daily lives. So I know this is really unfortunately, like many people say, grief is something that all of us will have to experience at one point or another in life. So what is really great is that we get to have a guest on today that's really made the conversation around grief and bereavement not only approachable, but there's such an ease and conversational tone to the work that she does. I'm super excited to have our special guest on, the founder and host of the Grief Gang podcast, Amber, Jeffery. Having lost her mother at 19, Amber's journey with bereavement began as a personal one, with her desire to not just deal with grief personally, but really to connect with others and understand that loss that was not only just personal to her, but for so many others. What started as her podcast with, I gotta say, one of the catchiest taglines on the planet, I'm going to read it: "Welcome to the gang, the one no one asks to be part of." It has grown in its years with such a massive listenership. I am one of them, and has over 20,000 Instagram followers as well. It is such a wonderful community around the podcast. Like I said, it's its own community network outside of just what you would think is just a show. And Amber's goal really is to normalize the conversation of grief, break down those taboos, and really bring a reminder in her conversations that people can not only grieve and talk about it, but you can have simultaneous grief and happiness in life. So I'm super excited to have Amber on this episode. Amber, welcome to the show.
Oh, Dominique, what an intro. What an intro. Thank you so much. I forgot that I was a guest here, and I'm just watching you like just listening to you. It's absolutely fantastic. No, thank you so much for inviting me here today. What a lovely introduction. Thank you. I was thinking it took me a bit down memory lane. I thought, I'm really excited to be here and to be speaking with your wonderful community as well today. So thank you.
Oh, of course. I love it. Hey, we can clip this intro and you can send that anytime you need an interview. Be like, here's 3 minutes about me.
I'll use that for my next bio. Just be like, here, listen to Dominique talk about.
We're going to get to jump right in because so many people, when they get to know you, they get to know you through your work with the Grief Gang podcast, but we want them to get to know you outside of talking about grief. So we're going to jump in to our fun first segment, Remember the Last Time.
Remember the last last time? Do you remember the last time?
Remember the last time is our simple, fun way of going to ask our guest all of the last things they've done. So it's fun and quirky. And as I was reading it, I just laughed to myself that we're having an episode about bereavement, and I picked a topic called the last time. So that just, knowing me, I morbidly, subconsciously went, oh, that's a great segment to pick. So we're
Very fitting, very fitting.
very fitting. Oh gosh. Okay, we're gonna go in before I just continue to feel so self-conscious about my decisions on this episode.
No, not at all. Okay, so what I've been up to, just like the last time. Okay,
yes.
go.
So when was the last time you got majorly dressed up?
Oh my lord. Oh my god, the last time I got majorly dressed up. That is a really good question, because right now it's just been work. So it's either been uniforms or like just slacks. So the last time I probably got majorly dressed up was oh my gosh, I went out somewhere a couple of weekends ago and I was wearing heels, and about 2 weekends ago I went to a bottomless 70s brunch for my best friend's birthday, and we were all ABBA themed. It was all ABBA themed. It was a great time. That was about 2 weekends ago, and my feet were throbbing after.
Oh my god, I'm just having like all the Mamma Mia music now popping into my head at that.
On loop. Yeah.
What was the last app you used on your phone?
Oh, as always, Instagram.
Got it.
I wish it wasn't, and I wish it was like Headspace or something like that, but it was Instagram. Yeah.
When was the last time you did something that made you feel like a kid?
Oh, that's actually quite easy. This weekend just gone, we visited my mum's hometown by the seaside, and I was with my little niece and nephew who were 2 and 3. We went down to the arcades and we got all like the pennies and just did the arcades and the pinball machines and the Pac-Man and the basketball, and it really took me back to feeling like a little girl again. Loved it.
Oh, I want to now go to an arcade now. Oh my gosh. When was the last time you got some really good advice, whether it was on the podcast about grief or even outside of it?
Oh, that's a good one, because I feel like I'm very blessed in that I do have a lot of people in my life through the podcast and through who I surround myself with, who constantly give me good advice and guidance. Probably the most quite recently is speaking with a friend like in the space, and we do quite similar work, and just speaking about pouring myself into sometimes like saying yes too much, and just reiterating to me, Amber, you have to sometimes water your own grass and stop feeding everything else for everybody else, and look for your own journey and think how much have you been kind of not like neglecting it, but stay in your lane, water your grass. And it just kind of really brought me back home when my mind's just been here, there, everywhere, jobs for this, tasks for that, and just going, what do I want to do, and how is that going to fuel me and my journey and my growing and my community and support them, and really just honing in of what's important to you, Amber. So that was really good. That was like a couple of weeks ago. That was
I love that. When was the last holiday you went on, whether big or small? Because I know the UK opened up slowly a few months ago. So even if it was a small holiday.
Do you know what, Dominic, I wish even I had a small holiday. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And I'm livid about it, to be honest. The last holiday I went on, it was March 2020. We went to Thailand. Thailand's a really special place for me, and kind of not purposely. It was the first time we ever went was about 6 months after my mum passed away, and it was a real like getaway holiday, and I just felt so relaxed there. And in the March time of 2020, I was like, I really just want to go back there, and so we booked it. And I just let go of everything when I'm there. It's just the people are beautiful and so kind, and you're just so looked after. And the day we landed was the day of lockdown in the UK, so we were skin of our teeth. It was very timely, but that was our last holiday, and I think we're probably going to book to go there again. Just love it so much. It's just a beautiful place. Yeah.
I'll have to pick your brain. That is on my bucket list of countries to go to, so I will have to pick your brain about that one day. Oh my gosh. When was the last time you went device free for more than 24 hours? Amber's face, nobody saw it but me, but Amber's face was like, oh no.
I don't, for 24 hours. I don't think I ever have. I think that's so bad. I don't think I ever have. Probably the most, do you know what, was probably flying to Thailand. It was probably flying to Thailand where we literally traveled for about 24 hours, and probably didn't touch my phone. And that was nearing on 2 years ago. Other than that, that thing has been glued to me, and not by choice.
Same. My sister's wedding, she had a pre-pandemic mini moan, and then she just had their actual wedding they postponed last weekend. And that was, you would think even on a wedding I wouldn't have my phone on me, but lo and behold, it's there.
Yeah. I think even on my wedding day, like I have a little clutch bag with my phone in it. The thought of it being with someone else, I think no. No.
I love that. And then last one, when was the last time you talked about grief outside of work? Since it is your focal point, obviously.
It's interesting. It's because it is, so much of my work, and takes up, so a lot of people who know me now, and even people who knew me before Grief Gang, knew how much importance of talking about it is. So it has trickled its way into like my personal circles. But probably outside of work and speaking about it was probably again this weekend, where we went back to our mum's hometown and visited family there, and we've got a poorly family member there at the moment, and kind of stepping at it, it's weird, it's a new experience of grief with a family member. She's actively dying, whereas with our mum, she just died on within 24 hours, was gone. So now visibly seeing a family member dying, it's a different new type of grief, and seeing that grief in other family members who are more immediate to her, and taking away my Grief Gang head and kind of like my work head, and going, oh no, this is my family, and I have to ride this wave, and I have to support another person in my family now, and so helping and supporting my great uncle through that, and seeing his grief, and speaking from, he's had people die in his life already, anything like that, but being the youngest of our family in this scenario, and in supporting an elder, it's an interesting change in dynamics. So this weekend it was a real eye-opener that all my knowledge of grief sometimes, and all that I've learned in my community sometimes is really put to the test, and sometimes I have to not apply everything that I've learned, and just look at what's in front of me here and say, this is my grieving great uncle for his wife who's ultimately going to die very soon, and take away all the books that I've learned and all the people that I've spoken with, and just think he is here in front of me right now, and how can I best support him? So probably this weekend. Grief is kind of my life, but then there are pockets of it that aren't. And I think if people hear, like if I say grief is my life, they think, oh blimey, you must be fun to be around. I think I'm a hoot. I'm an absolute hoot, and I am, because grief isn't all doom and gloom. There's a lot of beauty in grief, and a lot of laughter in grief, which is what I very much like to portray through my podcast and through my community.
I love that, and I hope this little intro segment got to let people have a little glimpse at who you are as well, and that is so, like you said, it is so multifaceted of being able to even working in chronic illness people and being chronically ill, they go, oh my God, it must be struggle city from the moment you wake up through until the end of the day. Some days my body likes to remind me that it is going to give me a rough day, but other days it's not. And so you have to always remind people that there's fluctuation for everybody, even in serious topics. And even going off of that, I'm going to be testing Amber's ability to use all of that knowledge and some of her witty humor that I've gotten to know as well, and put it in with another perfectly titled segment for an episode on grief. We're going to go into Life Tinder Challenge.
Life Tinder Challenge. Swipe right.
God, the names of these segments do nothing for this topic. I'm just thinking about in my head, God. It's like nothing's beneficial.
I'm looking forward to this one.
Life Tinder Challenge is, no, we are not going to try to combine dating and grief conversation, not our show. But what we are going to do is combine humor and informative chat. So we are going to chat with Amber about some different hot button topics or different things we've had brought up as a lot of DMs through so many young people who are chronically ill, talking about grief and bereavement and with their social settings. And we're going to figure out the different things about these topics that we would swipe left on as a no and swipe right on as a yes. So one of the things we get quite often is wanting, if they have to go to a funeral or they want to send something to a friend's family, if a friend has passed, is flowers and floral arrangements, and saying, I'm not sure as a young person how I feel about doing that. That feels older to me. So what do you feel on your end? What kind of sides would we go on with sort of the floral arrangement vibe?
It's, and you know, one thing, I'm so happy that you said which is no, which is yes, because I have no idea about Tinder. I've never used Tinder in my life, and that's not a preach. That's just, I've been with my partner since I was 16. I've never used Tinder in my life. Okay, so left is no, right is yes, and flower arrangement sending. See, I'm going to be the awkward person. I'm on the fence here because I see both sides. I see absolutely the point of why it seems a bit older and it seems a bit formal, and sometimes, but I think flowers can be really beautiful. But then another side, especially from my community as well, that I've heard, it's that, especially when I looked back on without all of our flower arrangements that we were sent, it's that they die as well. And it's like when you've got a house full of flowers and you are just, riddled with your grief and mourning, you're mourning in that stage. And the next thing you've got to do is clean up all these dead flowers. It's like, and cleaning up flowers is a horrible task. The petals all go everywhere. It's just, they stink after a while as well. It's like, ugh. And so I thought, when that was put to me, I thought, yeah, that's really true. So, okay, I'm not going to be the awkward person being like, I don't know. I'm going to say, I'm going to swipe left as well. No.
Yeah, I agree. I had a friend with when one of our relatives had passed away, she had sent us like a succulent plant, like a potted one. And that was what she had said. She goes, when I had relatives pass away, it was similar with flowers. And so she's like, I'm going to give you something that you can keep the pot. This thing will last. And so you can just have it with her when she sent her cards and was like, and just keep it. And so then that was always something, even moving forward, that was a few years ago. My sister has now done that as well. We'll look for like potted plants instead if we want to send something a few weeks after a funeral. And it's always, we're like, something that won't immediately look horrifying, as it also then dies on you, and you're like now giving a task to a person, like you said, that's mourning.
It's nothing worse, and you need low maintenance. Like the last thing you need in those early few weeks of grief is to think, oh my God, I've got about 5 vases here that I need to keep refreshed water in here and keep these things alive. But yeah, having something, like a plotted partner, an orchid, or an orchid, I think as well is really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And even just doing a little bit of research into flowers and their meanings and stuff like that. You can find flowers and plants that hold meaning and, you know, different sentiments that don't die within like a week. So yeah, I'm gonna on flowers. No.
No, what about condolence cards? Because I always will get constant conversation about, I go to the store and I read these cards and it's as if the people who wrote them have never experienced this.
Yeah. They're just so tacky.
Yeah.
They're so tacky. I do like, there's a lot of people in the space that I've seen now, they're almost like they are doing their own sympathy cards, and some of them are witty, some of them are funny. It totally depends on the person you're giving it to, and if you know if they will appreciate like a little bit of a dry humor kind of card. You know your person and whoever you're trying to support and how they will take it. Like I think if I was probably I think timing as well too, maybe not the first like week, a couple of weeks in, maybe a dry humor, not the first week, something like that. But yeah, sympathy cards, I think if you're going to do one, you need to really know your person, and not just one from like the petrol station or gas station. Like that's just tacky. I'll go yes on them. I'll swipe right on sympathy cards, because I did when I've still got some now from people when, you know, really sentimental messages in there, and I don't go back to them and read them, but it's nice to, when there's a really beautiful message in there, just to feel that love when you read it again, of those people who really were there for you in the trenches.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, definitely when you mentioned people, there are so many Etsy shops, even a lot of grief charities now sell their own cards. Obviously, that donates money back to the charity. So as a nonprofit, I thoroughly enjoy that. But it is, you have to take the time to, even if you go into like a normal card shop and look, you got to read them, because you'll find one that doesn't make you go, oh no. You'll find one that you're like, okay, and I can add something to this, or this feels in quotes safe enough, or not uncomfortable enough. So you gotta spend a little bit of extra time on, not so much like a birthday card. You gotta spend a little extra time shopping on that one. What about those notions when we hear people say you're going through the grief phase? How do you feel about sort of like a phase of grief? Amber's face. Guys, if you're not on the YouTube, you're missing the faces of Amber and I, which you must do if you're on our audio podcast platform.
It is, yeah, the visuals. That's one thing with podcasting as well. So people need to watch, because the visuals, sometimes you think you just have to see the faces. Yeah, that's a hard no. That's a hard no. Of this isn't a phase. Isn't a phase, and phases. Or is that in terms of like grief is just a phase?
Yeah, like there's a time period you'll be grieving, and then like the cycle of grief, and once you hit stage 5, I believe there's 5.
Oh.
Yeah, and then your stages of grief is not on my Tinder. We already just swiped that left.
Yeah, that one's gone. The whole concept of just grief itself is just a phase, and that, you know, after you hit the first year, you'll be all right, or something, you know, after a couple of years, you'll be okay, and it just stops there. That to me is a hard no. You definitely go through phases within your grief, but that is, and a hard pill to swallow is for life. Your grief is here for life, and it's a lifelong journey. But yeah, the whole notion of that, you give it a year or 2 and you'll be all right. You'll never grieve again. You might not feel those raw emotions for a very, very long time, but for some people it can crop up again 20 years later, or they've realized they've been burying their grief for 10 years, and especially through this last 18 months and coming up to 2 years, a lot of people had time to sit with their grief. Their person may have died many, many years ago, and they thought they were okay, but having that stillness brought back a lot of things for them. And so that's why this grief thing, it never ends. And it's a hard thing to hear, I think, sometimes when you hear this, and especially if you're in the early throes of it, you're thinking, oh my God, what do you mean this is forever? And I don't mean, like I say, phases, doesn't mean the phase that you're in or the space you're in right now is going to feel like that forever. You will go through notions, you will feel happy again, you will be in a comfortable place with your grief, and you can go in and out of it. But I think that's the beauty of grief, is that there's something that was this person, whatever it is that you've lost, meant so much to you that you will have this for the rest of your life. I think someone said to me before, like the early days, you know, this pain, like, you know, it's almost an anecdote to how much I love my mum. If it was easy to get over, what would our love have meant to each other? Nothing, kind of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, and especially in the chronic illness space, because when you're with other people who are chronically ill, even 6 years of running InvisiYouth, I've been chronically ill for 12, but in running InvisiYouth, I've had people who've become close friends of mine who've passed away, and then people even more distantly who've become part of our community members, and having them pass away or their friends. And to hear that comment that there is no, all in air quotes, get beyond that point, is more intimidating, because you subconsciously know it's something you'll more often than others in the chronic illness space, you know, you'll feel it more often, you'll experience loss more often. So like you said, to know that those phases can continue moving through and you can live among those phases, I think is a nice way of being like, no, I wouldn't say there's a phase of grief that you just kind of, it finitely ends and I move beyond it and I look fondly back forever. But that, like you said, you can find you have pockets of grief will show up less and less, or you'll be able to handle them more and more as time goes on, so that it's not as intimidating if you are going to experience it. Massively.
And then when you get through those really, really dark stages of your grief, and it's really intimidating and overwhelming, once you've come out of it the first time, for me as well, I only can speak from personal experience, and when I go, and this is the thing, once I come out of it, I don't go, whew, yeah, I'm never going back there again, because I can't say if I'll never go back there again. Who knows, something could happen in my life where I might fall back into that again. But I know that I was able to pull myself out of it before, and that I can do it again. And that's not maybe with, you know, the same coping mechanisms or, you know, tools that I used. Your grief is a constant project. What worked for me in my grief probably last year doesn't work for me now. You're ever evolving. I don't think you ever regress in your grief. I think that can be quite a misconception as well when you go back into that dark place. Like, I felt really a lot of anger this weekend when I come back, just of the cruelty of what cancer is doing to my great aunt, of just, and I've never, like I said, I've never seen anybody actively die in my life. Mum just died, and just watching just the cruelty of it, I was really, really angry when I came home. And before, I would probably suppress that and just be like, whatever. But I just felt what I had to feel this time, because I know that it's better for me to feel it and just ride it out rather than suppress it, because I've been there before where I've suppressed it and it ended very ugly for myself and people around me as well. So it's a constant, we're always going to analyze ourselves and what our coping mechanisms are. And for me, it's a project I'm willing to grow and you know, work on and grow on, because it's for my own emotional well-being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. And even the last of our Tinder challenge, especially for the chronic illness space, the whole notion of preparing for bereavement or preparing for grief, if it's terminal illness or life-threatening illness, that conversation comes up quite a bit. So what do you feel about when people say, oh, I was told to help with my family members and we're preparing for when death would be happening? Do you think that's something that can be successfully done as a concept, or not really?
So preparing people for death, I think it's a sticky one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sticky one, because like I said, even me reverting back to my family member now, I was asked actually the other day, they said, do you think, you know, you losing your mum will help prepare you for the imminent death of this family member? And I said, I think nothing will prepare you for that moment. It's soul crushing, it's earth destroying. But if you've been through it before, and they can be all totally different losses, of course, and no two losses are the same, even within your own family. And I feel, though, with the imminent death of my next relative, I feel equipped in how I will recognise emotions in myself. And I'll know when these feelings rise, such as anger, because I already know that's going to arise. I'll be able to identify that better. Because when Mum was here, or when Mum died, I didn't recognize that my anger was a whole lot of grief. And then, and I was just this, honestly, Dominique, I was this raging little emoji, you know, that angry emoji, like that was just me, just like roaming the world. And then it took me 3 years to realize that all of that was just a whole lot of grief that I hadn't let out. And so I think I'll be better at analyzing those feelings and supporting and recognizing those feelings in other family members too. But I do think there is power in somewhat preparing yourself in terms of like admin and stuff like that. I think for people, admin and just getting ducks in a row really makes all the difference. Not only for the person who is dying, having that peace of mind that their loved ones here are looked after, or just, you know, somewhat in a good position. And that's not even saying financially or being like, you know, leaving with a load of money, just knowing that affairs are in order. You know, like I didn't know where half of the documents for my mum's stuff was. I was like, where is all her stuff? Like, where's her passport? Like, we've got to give that back. Where's that? And all things like that. But you can read all the books, you can listen to all the podcasts, you can do whatever. But yeah, nothing can prepare you for in that moment. But you can be just a bit better equipped just with all those little small things. And in terms of language and terminology, especially if you're supporting somebody who is going through a bereavement. But yeah, it's a sticky one. I know many people who, and a lot of friends in the space who, when because I didn't have a moment to prepare myself. I was just, oh my God, my mum's going to die in 24 hours, or like she's gone. But for friends and people in my life who have had people who are dying in their life and watching them, I remember I had one friend, she said, like, I thought I was like cheating grief, like I was getting one up on grief and I was getting ahead of it. And then Dad died and she was like, this is all rubbish. Like, I just did all of that reading and all of that research for nothing. And I was like, oh babe, I'm so sorry, but yeah, more for you. But if it brings peace, if it brings you peace to think, I'm getting my ducks in a row and I'm doing all the reading, and that's giving you support to get through those final years, months, weeks, I don't see a problem in that.
Yeah, like you said, the admin of it is really where I would say you can't really prepare for the emotional kind of psychological side of it. But especially in the chronic illness space, what I've seen from friends of mine who've had life-threatening illness or terminal illness, and so this has been a narrative for them and their family since they were kids, or from a diagnosis point. For them, it's always been they want to have a semblance of power and control in a powerless situation, and they want to provide as many even fun opportunities for their family that they know they'll have without them there. So for them to, I always will say, having, even on my end, before I had diagnoses, when my health was very chaotic in the beginning and doctors were throwing terms and tests onto the wall for me and going, well, until these come back, we don't know if it's this terminal illness or this life-threatening illness, and you're just sort of waiting for results. And it was a repetitive throw that term out to you and then taking it back. Oh, no, you don't have it. Let's try this one. And no, you don't have it. It was important for me with my family going, okay, then it became, even with my older sister, would be dinner table conversation of being like, all right, well, how do we want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? Like I'm 16, 17 at that point. And it's not something doctors would be like, don't worry about everything will be fine, because they don't want you to focus on it going the wrong way. But I was like, well, no, I wouldn't want to leave my family with them questioning if they did things right by me. And as a young person, that's not something you were really expecting. But in the chronic illness space, like you said, that logistics of certain things you can have conversation about, that that are more activities that you would know siblings or friends would like to have afterwards, that could be fun reminders for them if they're in a state of their grief that's more sad or negative for them, that they could kind of pick from things that you've kind of left for them to have or to do. Like you said, it gives a sense of comfort to those that are left, but also gives a sense of power to those that are in that process or know that's an option.
And I think, we even, bereavement itself, I'm speaking about grief and bereavement, it's slowly on the rise, but speaking about death and dying, there's a long road for that.
Yeah.
Myself, I've dipped my toes into the end of life doula kind of field and heading towards getting my diploma in that. And even in my space of saying okay, I've done how long talking about grief, but I want to go even before grief. I want to speak about death and dying. And even it is that's a whole different ball game. And even as myself as a young woman, I'm not chronically ill, but I'm very conscious. But from losing my mum, and mum didn't leave anything behind. She was 51. She didn't think she was going to die. I'm now very conscious of, I want my family and my loved ones and my friends to know what I want and to use whatever my assets and how I want it, stuff like that. And they don't have to be, people watching, they've already had conversation about, don't think about that. You don't need to think about that. It's recovery. We're going to talk about recovery and treatment and stuff like that. But we have to be realistic. You have to be realistic. And why not just, we're not sitting here and saying, put a down payment on the bloody coffin. I'm not saying that, guys. I'm just saying I might like this to be done with my body. Why can't I have control? For anyone who's watching, why can't I have control of what's going to be done with my body? Why can't I have control of how my send-off is going to be? What even kind of send-off that I want to have? Do I even want one? Has anybody asked me here? You are the most important person in this. And there's some real great kind of steps in my doula training. Remember, there was these 3 books they recommended to us to kind of start that conversation with friends and family. And one of them, it's literally almost like this journal. You just you can write down where you want your funeral to be, this and that, and you can it can be part of your documents bit, when you die here, but here's all my documents and here's his book, literally a step-by-step guide of what I want. I looked at it and I was like, I'm getting that. I was like, get some Amazon wish list for Christmas. My Amazon wish list is mad. It's Lumia alarm clock, death book, face cream. My family are like, oh my god.
Oh my god.
Death doesn't have to be doom and gloom. And talking about death, dying and bereavement, what I've noticed the most is it doesn't, as much as it has made me think about how I want to die or how I want to die and what was done with me after I die, of actually how I want to live. Massively how I want to live. I couldn't believe when I come, and even with the work that I do, when people say it must be a lot of doom and gloom, man, but I said no, it's a lot of life. It's a lot of life in this, and how whatever we have left, how we want to use it. And I think that's really, really important.
Oh, that's such a good end to that segment. I love that. Yeah. Not the pre-purchase, not the death book pre-purchase you're calling it. The overarching that ending is great. But I love that because it goes great into, like we said, with everything that we provide. And before we go into our intermission segment, where we get to have another fun story from Amber, before we get there, I always tell everyone with InvisiYouth, all of our programming that we provide, like the podcast and all of that, we want to make sure that we provide that for free throughout the year, all of our virtual resources. So it's tangible to you whatever place you're at in your chronic illness or disability journey, whether you're an ally to somebody who is chronically ill or disabled, or you are yourself, that you can utilize and access all of our resources and programming for free throughout the year at any time that you want. So we always drop our website's donation link below. You'll see that pop up here. If you're on the YouTube page, it'll pop up around me. It'll be in the description notes as well. Because every dollar, every pound really does make a difference in keeping the lights on for a nonprofit like ours, so we can keep having important conversations and giving so many life tips like you're going to be getting from Amber throughout the episode, even more when we go into our second half. And when we do that, we will lead off with our intermission segment where Amber gets to tell us a story, guys. It is So That One Time.
So that one time.
So that one time is when I get to lean back, relax, drink my coffee, and all of us get to have Amber tell us a story that I am going to be learning with all of you. So Amber, the podcast mic is yours. Tell us a story.
Oh God, like, oh my God, it's, you know, because my life is like a story, I swear to God. Oh God, this story. That one time, I'm going to keep it around, like, obviously bereavement, and not just my shoddy life of just random things that happened to me. So I'll take this is, again, I think goes in quite well of just the emotions of grief and how sometimes they can be really, I say, inappropriate. And oh God, I can't even going to tell this story. Okay, I'm going to set this in. It's my mum's funeral. So this is the 15th of July 2016. And my mum was buried back in her hometown. So we were born and raised in Slough. It's near Windsor Castle, you know, Queen Lizzie, Windsor Castle, Berkshire. But my mum, she was born and raised in a seaside town called Great Yarmouth in Norfolk. Lovely seaside town. The only dying wish we ever knew of our mum, which was very helpful, was that she wanted to be buried with her mum. Her mum died about 2 weeks after my mum was born, but that was the only thing we ever knew. Mum, she said, whenever I die, take me back home to my mum. So we always knew that was that. And so that was a big hole to do, of getting her up from down south to the East Anglia to the bit there. We waited about a month to bury mum, and it was a fantastic funeral. Her funeral was amazing, and myself and my brother, we spoke, and that was hard, but we're very glad that we did. And it was just an amazing turnout. People from far and wide came to our mum and to say their last goodbyes. And so yeah, we had the burial, and we went to the wake. So the wake was in like the seaside pub mum used to drink in when she was younger. And you know how, like, do you have like wakes in America as well? Yeah, like wakes and stuff like that. Are wakes normally in like people's homes, aren't they? They tend to be
sometimes, yeah. Other times they're at their homes or like at a restaurant. So so ours was, it was at like this pub, and it was the dingiest pub ever. I was like, this is awful. Like, if mum was here, she'd be absolutely livid that it was here. We were like, whatever, let's just all have a good drink. Like the most horrible sandwiches ever, and we're all having a bit to drink, obviously, because I'm the daughter. Everyone's just ploughing me with drink and stuff like that. So, you know, throw in some really heavy grief and a really heavy day and alcohol. You're basically, they were asking for what was going to happen next. And let's bear in mind the hothead Amber that was back in then. And there was a lot of family stuff going on around the time of mum's funeral, a lot of politics. And we were then moving on to like another place that our mum used to. We kind of going like a bar crawl of like where mum loved and stuff like that. And we were going onto our next destination. And one of my friends, who, bless her, had come to the funeral, she'd gone into the toilets. So we're all just, me and a couple of my friends were by the bar just waiting, the toilets just in the distance. And then there are these, we're all a bit tipsy, all a bit drunk, all a bit merry, we're all good vibes. And then there are these local punters just sat there, and like, they're just a bit scabby, They're just there. And then we were like calling out to our friend. We were like, come on. We're saying her name. And then in the corner of my ear, I could hear someone mimicking. I was like, who's that mimicking us? And I turned around, it's one of these lot. And I was like, and then just this rage came over me, it's absolute rage. And I was like,
I beg your pardon, a lot of swearing, which I won't do on here because I know we've got a young crowd. A lot of that. I was just so livid, and I remember I was about to just storm over there, God knows what, but then all of a sudden I felt my brother just grips me up and go, into the taxi you go. And then in the moment, just in the taxi, and I was just so angry. But then like years later, we sit back now and laugh at it and think, Amber, you rough, that's so rough. Like, why would I try and start a fight on my mum's funeral? Like, but we look back now and we laugh as a family. We think, oh my God, Amber, as if you were about to like swing at this little punter. And I look and it was just like this little old man. He was so rude. He was really, really rude. But that's what grief does to you. Like, I was tunnel vision. I just saw red. And like now I would dream of doing something like that, because I just like, oh, you don't know me. You don't know my situation. I should have got the vibe that we're all dressed in black and like, and it was a summer's day. So like, they should have kind of got the vibe what we were doing. But I look back and I think, oh, Amber, 19-year-old Amber, she just had so much rage and just so much stuff going on in here, and just didn't know how to articulate it or compute it. And it just came out in just, I always used to describe like my grief and the anger with my grief. I always felt like it would just be like pouring out of me, not even pouring, just like literally beaming out of me, but in the most, not in a nice beaming way, in a horrible way. And I think just over the years just managed to kind of, patch those holes up and realize, no, we don't have to express it like that. And that's why podcasting and my community and just writing just to the abyss, which is now no longer the abyss, and now all these people, has been the most amazing thing for me and my grief. And I think that's why I love it so much, because it's never been with the intention to, of course, I always love the idea of it helping somebody else, but penultimately it's always been to help me in my grief, and to just, as the years go by, to share the evolving and the involvement of it. But yeah, that's my story of how I was a rowdy little cowbag when I was 19.
I love that, for the sense that so many people worry when somebody has passed that they have to handle it perfectly when they're in front of others, but and then worry if they don't, that's something they'll look back on so like shamefully or be upset over it. But I think it's so wonderful that you're like, it shows that there's so many different responses to any moment of grief, but then also that it is something you can look back on. And there are things at relatives' funerals, even culturally, I'm full Italian, there were things that my grandmother did at one funeral, and I was like, what is this something I have to learn to do for us? I don't know if I want to do this. And you would see my parents and my sister, and I would be like, we're not doing, if it's one of us, we're axing this one off the list. I'm not doing that. But I love that, because it shows people that you can have like all different reactions to it, and then look back on it, and even look back on it in a fond way, being like, oh, you can look fondly on something that's very tumultuous at the time for you.
Oh yeah, like in the moment, I think in the weeks after it, I felt pure embarrassment, just like, oh my God, Amber, why on earth would you do that? And now, yeah, it's become like a funny memory, but like a turning point of going like, yeah, we're not going back there. And we're recognizing in the moment when we feel like that, and we're putting a pin in that. Because you can't be starting fights at funerals, like, God's sake.
Going off of that, we can go right into our next segment, because the title will go right into that. We're going to go into one of my favorite segments, Break That Glass Ceiling.
Break that glass ceiling. Break that glass ceiling.
Break That Glass Ceiling is when we get to talk about all of the misconceptions, the under-discussed topics, especially for now we're going to talk about, obviously, with grief and talking about death as well. And with Amber, we're going to be bringing up some of the most brought up questions we've had as well for a lot of the young adults in our chronic illness community when they talk about grief and death. So I wanted, with the Grief Gang podcast as well, even your own experience, like you had mentioned, when your mom passed, you were 19, which fits right into our age range. but then also you've interviewed people across so many different ages as well with the Grief Gang podcast. So do you feel like there's one sort of either misconception for young adults, for young people that are dealing with grief, that's different for them than for other age ranges?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's as much as my audience is catered to younger audience, it speaks to a wider ones. But the thing of being young and bereaved and that is that you're robbed of so much. So say, when my mum died, and I had people in my life who would say, yeah, my mum died too, but they'd be like 30 years my senior. And I'd go, I know that you understand the feeling of losing your mother and losing that maternal role, but do you know what it's like to lose a mother at 19, to lose the whole future of that? I've lost a grandmother. To my future children, I've lost my mother at my wedding day. I've lost her being there through all my pinnacle career moments, everything like that. We're robbed of just so much. And so that's not to diminish the loss of someone who is older, who has had that with their whoever it is they may have lost. It's just an extra added burn to that. And to be so young and have that role taken out of your life, that person taken out of your life, especially in a paternal role, I'll speak from, is that you lose your childlike innocence. Because I was a child, I look back, I was a child, I was freshly 19, and so I had to grow up very quickly, and the things that my peers would worry about was old news to me now. I had to worry about things like finance and just some literally simple things as like, if my washing doesn't get done, then like if I don't do it, no one else is going to do it for me. Like my mum's not here to do it anymore. All those small things like that. And that's from my own perspective too. But yeah, being young and bereaved too, and I had to work on this too, because we are all the stars of our own show, and we all put our own self and our own grief at us. But you think, what have I lost? I've lost, like I just said, I've lost my mum, the future grandmother to my children, my mum, this and that. But then being young and bereaved too, and having a parent die like quite relatively young too, you grieve for what they've lost out on as well.
Yeah.
I think, oh my God, my mum had so much more life in her. She had would have been a grandmother. She would have been done different things with her career. Find love again, maybe, and you grieve for the loss of what they could have had too. But yeah, the difference I think between being young and bereaved, and potentially being of more senior age and being bereaved, is just that feeling of, we just had collectively together just so much taken away from us. And it's cruel, and especially when those things, like for me, like I'm not getting married anytime soon until the partner proposes. He's not here, I can't speak loud enough. Hello. Or I'm not planning to have children anytime soon. So it's just like that pain is just dangling there in the wind, and I know that will be such a beautiful time in my life, but it's just got under that layer. I already know a new layer of grief is going to come with that, and a new perception to my grief with that, and it's almost scary to etch closer and closer towards that. And even as well, being young and bereaved, this might even speak more for people who have lost parents when they were very, very little, and their parents dying at maybe quite a young age, maybe between 30s and 50s, something like that. As you approach your person's age of when they die, and you supersede their age, or you get closer, you think, like, I know probably when I hit 50, I'll be like, oh my God, like, my mum died at 51. Am I all right? You just have that. It's just all these little things that, when you're young and bereaved, that come into play, and you're like, oh God,
Yeah, it's like the power of the what if. I always say for people who are chronically ill, you're seeing, it's either a conversation for yourself or you're seeing friends that you've met through your health experience or virtually, and you're dealing with the what ifs of everything, whether it's the what ifs of what, like you had said, what they have not been able to do that you knew as a friend and you knew from them what they wanted, and you're seeing all the what ifs of if they would have been able to do those things, and then also for yourself of all the things that you now won't be able to experience. And it's trying, if for young adults, it's trying to not, like you said, that pain is something dangling. I like how you phrased it, but it's not something you need to hold on to until those moments come. And I think for young adults, that's something that's really important to remind them, is that it's something that can stay there and be present, but you don't have to always lean into it. You can know it's there and you're recognizing it and not trying to push it away, but you're still moving forward until you know you'll eventually get to those different stages where you would recognize it would come forward from. And I think that kind of stems well into what I was going to ask you too, is what we both talk about quite a bit, is this sort of what are things that you think would be helpful of how to make the conversation of grief, but even of the conversation for our community when they talk about knowing that the potential of losing friends is higher than others. How do we make the conversation around it less fearful for other people, that they are trying to make it less of a worrisome conversation, or I don't want to touch the conversation of grief or death with other young people?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think amongst young people, it's quite easier. But that's not to say, like, I have people in my life and who are just like, no, don't want to go there. And sometimes you do have to just respect that. If some people are not ready, sometimes it can just be more detrimental than it is actually beneficial. And you really have to read the room and read the real person. But planting the seeds is sometimes good. Like one of my best friends, we both lost our mothers. She lost her mum about 14 years ago, obviously mine's 5. And I'd always try and plant the seed. And then naturally through, which I'll lead on actually as well, through like my online community, her seeing me be so expressive. Not even, and I say this lightly because I think sometimes when I say things like this, it can come across as like, go and start an Instagram, go and start a podcast, because it's not. You don't, and this is something, it sounds so contradictory from me, because I feel like that's what I have done. You don't always have to turn your pain into power. You don't have to always make something monumentous around the loss of your person. You have to go and do it. Sometimes people, and I think speaking about grief, some people think, if you're not speaking about it, you're not okay. But we don't know what those people do behind closed doors. They could be tapping into their grief just personally themselves. They could be journaling for all they know. I remember I journaled for a very long time before I started the podcast, and probably people thought, oh, she's not speaking or speaking to them specifically, or like, it's like, maybe I don't want to speak to you, like, don't like you, I don't want to speak to you about my grief. But I'm sat at home at night writing pages and pages and pages about my grief, and I feel okay. But for somebody who's wanting to have that conversation, so whether it's they want to express their own grief or try and support somebody who is grieving, I think a really good gateway is leading by example. It's leading by example. We think about children. You want a child to lead by example and follow in certain footsteps, or act a certain way and behave so. You lead by example. And so showing that it's okay to talk about it. And sometimes, not on the first time, people might be a bit like, Like even, for example, with my own brother, I think him seeing me start the podcast, he was a bit like, not sure. And then now we have really open conversations about it. And it's given him confidence to go, like I miss mum or anything like that when we speak. And then another really good gateway is through the online community. I know so many people, it's music to my ears when people message me and they say, I've not been able to like articulate what I'm feeling, but your post or this episode really encapsulated that. And I just forwarded it to my friend and just said, like, I don't know how to say this to you, but please just listen to this or read this. This is exactly how I feel. And then it just gets that conversation going. And how easy is that? Like forwarding a post on Instagram, forwarding a tweet, sharing a tweet with somebody. It's a real good conversation starter. And so there's all these little ways, or even sharing that and being like, this is just how I feel. I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but I just want to let you know where I'm at.
Yeah, I love.
Even for somebody like supporting someone, being like saying like, oh, I've just really read this interesting article, or read this listened to this really interesting podcast. That person who's then bereaved, and this person who is supporting them knows, okay, I have a lot of confidence now that you're doing the work. You're doing the work to meet me where I'm at. I'm now breaking down those barriers, because it's all, when you're sharing your grief, and it has to be, it's very sacred. It's very, and that's one thing I've learned as well. I used to probably speak to everybody, and I do speak about my grief, but those very intimate things and those intimate moments with mum, and in my early days of grief, I would tell anybody who would listen, because you just latch, you just want people to listen to you. And now I've realized that those moments are actually very sacred, and they need to be held by very trustworthy people who aren't just going to meet it with, oh, that's a bit much, with somebody who'll go, oh, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So it's very important to have trust in those people, and it takes time. I'm not saying it's going to happen from the jump. It takes time to find those people, but when you do, you won't stop talking. I promise, you won't stop talking.
Yeah, and I love that my friend that has a big part of her platform, she was a cystic fibrosis activist, Claire Weiland, and she had passed away a few years ago, but she talked about building a relationship with death and brought that forward so much. So her and I would always talk about that as well. I always said the first episode of her YouTube channel I listened to was her saying, well, I'm dying faster than everybody else, and like kind of laughed at it. But reminding everyone that it's something that we're all going to do, and that it was really important for her to remind people that it's something we're all going to do, but also it's something that is very intimidating and powerful, because obviously what death is sort of the penultimate, obviously, at the end of it all. So for that chronic illness space, it's remembering that you can sort of find ways of leaning support in that. You can, like you said, you can converse verbally, you can do writing, whether that's personal as well. So there's so many different ways to slowly kind of bring the conversation in, kind of drop a movie or things that would kind of get a conversation going where you are timid to bring it up to friends, but you want that support. There's ways that you can kind of subtly we're a big platform of subtle activism. And so you can subtly bring things in and kind of gauge. You can then see in a large group of family members or friends, which ones kind of are immediately responding to a scene about grief the way that you think would help you well, and that can serve you well. And so it kind of will provide that. And I think that kind of lends into the last question I wanted to ask. Obviously, with us working with chronically ill young adults, sort of that the conversation for them is sort of compartmentalizing the concept of their own health with losing friends, whether it's the same diagnosis or virtual friendships. They always will have that worry to them of trying to compartmentalize, taking that somebody passing and putting it onto themselves, and sort of then manifesting that worry for themselves. So I wanted to kind of get your take on it as ways for a young adult to not let that grief kind of overwhelm them, when that's usually a primary sort of subconscious fear, that they don't want to be very public in their grief of a friend that might have had the same diagnosis, because it then kind of will make them think more of their own. So how do you kind of suggest that in terms of not being kind of constantly overwhelmed with that worry?
And that's hard, because you can understand as to why. If it is say of a friend or a close one who has died of similar illness, so of wanting to express their grief for that, but then not and how to not let it overwhelm you. I think boundaries are really important with that one. Really important. And knowing how far you want to go, and knowing when, okay, I'm expressing my grief and my loss for this person in my life, but it's now beginning to make me go inwards and think about me. But then even more so, whether this is controversial or not, is it a bad thing to think about your own mortality?
Yeah, we say that like quite a bit. That was what I was gonna mention as well after your answer, was that if there is we always say every diagnosis is different. I have friends who have the same list of diagnoses that I do, but it manifests differently. So we'll always remind everybody of that obviously everything manifests differently based on your own sort of physiological response to your illnesses or disability, but also something I'll always have in a mental health space that we'll talk about is if you leave those conversations or those fears in the dark, you're just kind of festering it and it'll keep growing because you're not giving it light. You're not opening the door to kind of kill the conversation or that fear. So you kind of addressing that even virtually to other friends of yours that might have known, or even bringing it up that this is a friend, will get a lot, that these are people from Instagram, that these are friends you have, and bringing that up to somebody in your physical friendship realm, that's something you can worry of. It's sort of somebody recognizing your own, like you said, they recognize your own fear of mortality, and kind of them then being able to provide that support is probably like a really good way of stopping it, like you said, at that point where the boundary is important.
And just having that healthy balance of recognizing that, okay, this will be me one day eventually, whatever the illness may be, and the grief that you're having for that person, and tapping into your own mortality. That's some heavy stuff. It is some heavy stuff. And knowing when enough is enough, of when, because it is hard. Even when I've on my end of life doula training, we did a lot of work on our own mortality, like to the extent of we planned our own funeral meticulously. We planned what the kind of things that if we were in like an ideal situation, we were dying, you know, where we had somewhat control, etc. What like senses would you want, what smells, what touches, all those things. And it really made you think about it. And as much as it was nice to know that I've got that plan, like I've got it in a folder, but then also I was like, this is a lot. And it was unearthing grief about my mum as well. So I can imagine people going through stuff like that and organising and getting that life admin done. It's a double-edged thing. You think, okay, yeah, I'm getting on top of things, but then like, oh, there's a reason why I'm getting on top of this, because yeah, I am dying, I am chronically ill. And yeah, it really unearthed some things for me about with my mum, because I thought she didn't get to have all of this. Yeah, and then maybe people who are watching who have that opportunity to do all of those things, it can bring a lot of like people I've lost maybe didn't have the time or the privileges. Like I think when I sat and wrote that down, I thought that's a real kind of like privilege for me that I do get to write that down and to leave that with my family, and they know what I want, because like my mum didn't have that privilege. I know a lot of people don't either as well. And I know it won't leave like my family in the dark, but it's a lot of self-work, that, and self-work is hard. Self-work is hard. Everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm like, it's bloody hard. Like going within is hard. I'm going within if you're chronically ill and having to hold the loss as well. It's a lot. So I think boundaries is really important with that, and you know yourself. And even if there are people in your life who are even pushing for you to even talk about the grief of somebody who you have lost, or speak about even like your own mortality and kind of prying that out, you know when enough is enough, and you think, no, this is it becoming too upsetting or not, but every little bit stepping out of comfort zone bit by bit is good. Like that, I'm keen on boundaries, but I am keen on pushing boundaries a bit. I'm always a little bit not like breaking them, but just because that's how we grow. When we do push our own boundaries and go, okay, I'm comfortable with that much, but I'm gonna reel it in a little bit more, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah,
I think that makes sense. That was
no, it really does. And I think, like you said, you're pressure. You're taking. It's a lot of pressure in a conversation, and you worry about, like you said, a lot of people in the chronic illness space, you worry about putting so much emphasis on worrying about that, but then also not wanting other people to think you're worrying. I mean, this is something I've thought of at different points, and I wouldn't want my parents or my friends or other family members to think I was worrying about that at any point. And sometimes an infamous conversation with the doctor said, well, we'll just wait until the other shoe drops, but live your life until then. And so it was always in the back of my head. And it was years later of me kind of keeping that subconsciously. My mom mentioned it in a doctor's appointment and was like, Dominique, tell them why you're worried about them being slower with treatment options or trying different things, and you're more hesitant. And so I mentioned it to them that I'm just sort of waiting for this other shoe to drop. And I've seen the other shoe drop for friends of mine. Yeah. And it was them being like, oh, okay. And it was then watching people in the medical space then kind of sit down and be like, okay, well, there's only so much, you can't control any of that for yourself, and you can't give all of that power to it. Like, we want you to recognize that you're the reason you will worry and feel that overwhelmingness is because you want more. You want to have more time, which is always the big end for people. Obviously in the young adult spaces, we feel like we have so much more time that we would like to have. So it's focusing on that present really is a really good benefit, like you said, as well, to kind of keep that in focus.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even before we go into our final segment, which we're going to build a quick guidebook for grief and bereavement. So make sure you guys will have your notes app out, or your Post-its and pens out for that one. Which I'm excited to get with Amber. But before we do that, we have a little quick commercial from one of our charitable sponsors, who you guys know we love for the last couple of years. You'll see it if you're on our YouTube channel. We'll have a little virtual ad will pop up alongside me, but we are super excited to have Teaspoonies as our charitable sponsor for this episode. They are raising awareness for invisible illness with innovative and ethical designs. It's a wonderful virtual store that you can get so many fantastic products of. The creator of the store and artist is Rachel Hoy, who is one of our Australian global brand leaders in our leadership program, who's really combined her passion of advocacy with her love of ethical consumerism and design, and has some really fantastic, beautiful things that you can buy from. Everything is always so ethically made, upcycled, 100% recycled. So you're really getting that benefit to the world on top of helping a lot of raising awareness for the invisible illness space as well, which is really fantastic, which was important to Rachel since she's lived with Lyme disease and co-infections and other chronic illnesses as well. And 2 of the different products on their store actually donate percentages to InvisiYouth when you buy them. So if you get their recycled card packs, which are 5 really witty, we talked about cards earlier, you'll see those pop up, really witty cards that will come up. You get those, and 50% of those profits get donated to InvisiYouth. And when you get their upcycled scrunchie packs that have 6 fantastic scrunchies that are hand tie-dyed and ethically made, those donate 100% of profits to InvisiYouth. They also have fantastic tote bags. They're famous pocket tees with, when you lift up the patterned pocket, they have sayings underneath the pockets, which is really fantastic. Their invisible illness pocket tee I have as well. So when you go on their store, you'll find so many fantastic things. They've been donating profits of some of their sales to InvisiYouth for a couple of years now. So that will be in the description notes as well and linked below, and you'll see it, like I said, on the side. So definitely thank Teaspoonies always for being such a integral part in the InvisiYouth community. So we're really excited to have them be our charitable sponsor for the episode. And like I mentioned, we're going right to the end. I know we keep our episodes nice and chatty. So we're going right to the end and building a guidebook with Medically Adultish Guidebook.
Medically Adultish Guidebook.
Medically Adultish Guidebook is where I'm going to chat with Amber, and we're going to build a guidebook on how to tackle the topic of grief for yourself, things you can add to your toolkit. And we're going to be just like listing those off really quickly. So I know something I was talking about when Amber and I were in our last segment, when she was mentioning is meeting people where they're at, like planting the seed of that conversation. is a lot of people find sort of bereavement counseling or grief counseling very intimidating if they're wanting to handle grief, and they stepping into that space seems very serious or melancholy at times. So what would be sort of things that you think are nice starters that people can do that are trying to deal with grief, whether that's things they can do individually or even in a social setting?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a fair bit now, like when I think back to when I was freshly bereaved, and I wonder if it was a case of it was always there, I just didn't know about it, or if it wasn't there before. But I'll start off with kind of like individually things that can help you with your grief and help you deal with your grief. I think everybody should journal at least once in their grief. And when I started journaling, it wasn't because like I had this real big connection with writing, and I still don't. And I say I write, but there's something about on pen to paper that really takes it from out of your mind and onto that paper. And I never really used to understand the power of that. And I think that's just a load of rubbish, like, or whatever. And then it just comes out of your mind. And with my journal, it's a real, it's a timepiece, because I look back to, and it was in this very early stages of grief, and there's a lot of darkness on those pages, and I look back and I think, oh my god, that was a real tough time, that was. But it's a real, try saying, a confidence booster, but just like to realize I got through that, and that was part of my grief and part of my journey. And I go in and out of journaling sometimes just to kind of have that memory and that keepsake. So I think everyone should at least journal at least one point in their life, even if you just write down one page and come back to it in 20 years. So I'd say journaling. Another thing personally and individually, I'm trying to think things of like what I do. Jewelry is a really big thing. This might be quite specific, and I don't know why. Jewelry is a really big thing for me, and having something close with you that will make you feel connected with your person, whether you are spiritual or whatever it may be. You know, some people may wear a cross, you know, whatever it may be. But I'm not wearing it now, but I have it on normally. I wear a necklace with my birthstone and my mum's birthstone on it, and I like it because it makes me feel really connected. And my mum's birthstone one, it's bigger, and then it's like an pendant, and my little one, it just like tucks into it as well, so almost like it clicks together. But then they're not from the same company, it's just by chance. It's really odd. So things like that, having things that you can have close by to you and near to you. Like I know some people, they'll have like in their handbags, they'll have like a necklace or a stone or a ring or something, just so they know it's with. I know someone who carries like their mum's phone, like their old phone, with them, just to have it nearby. So having things like that just to feel them close can be a real bit of comfort for your grief. Socially as well, peer-to-peer support groups, I'm really huge on that. Peer-to-peer support groups were something that kind of just dropped into my life just really unexpectedly. I was interviewing two co-founders of a peer-to-peer support group charity one day, and this is in London, and they said, oh, we're having our peer-to-peer pre-pandemic, and they said, oh, we're holding our support group tonight, do you want to come by and see what we do? I said, yeah, all right. And I went, and I never stopped going. And I went just as kind of like almost like to like not like journal, like you know, interview, but I just wanted to see what they really do live in action. And I just fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the space, and I'm now a host for them as well, and host support groups, and we've been really good friends ever since. And then the community, you find people who just get it in those groups, and there are ones in, you know, face to face in person, but then over the last year, where everybody's had to go virtual, there's almost been this new, you can reach people so far and wide globally on these groups. And more so, what's nice with virtual is what we notice sometimes too, is that people will join very nervous, because that's a nerve-wracking thing to go, I'm going to go to a support group like with all these strangers, like that's a lot. And if you're not that way inclined, or maybe like extroverted like that is really nerve-wracking. So the beauty of doing groups virtual is that you can sit with your camera off and your mic off and just listen, and you can listen and learn and see how other people talk about their grief, and you think, oh my god, she's speaking about that, about her grief, and that's exactly how I've been feeling. How has she tackled through it? And that's not to say you live off people's words, but you just have this feeling, it's that you're not alone. And there's something about being in those spaces that is so empowering. You walk out and you just know there's this community online that just get it. Obviously socially as well, the whole online community, immersing yourself in that. But I also think as well, it's good to have breaks from, it's good to have, and if you can, have breaks from your grief. And some people might think, what do you mean? Like, my grief just is engulfing me right now. And it is. And I think absolutely embrace that too. When you are feeling engulfed in your grief, there's a reason why, and you need to ride it out. But it's good to have breaks. I have breaks from my grief, and I run a bloody grief podcast. So you have to. So like, that's why I have like 2 separate accounts. I have my personal account and my grief account, because I'm like, my personal account is just stuff like Kardashians, stuff like that, and like these shopping accounts, because it's just like my escapism, because you do have to escape it. But that's not to say that I don't like my grief, because I love my grief, and I love my grief because it's my love for my mum. So yeah, socially, I'd say a massive on peer support groups, the online community, but yeah, be conscious to take breaks from it. And going back to what I kind of said before as well, about don't feeling that pressure of having to turn your grief into something like monumentous. There is, of not having to do that. And I know some people, they kind of do that sometimes, and it can gain traction. Like, I didn't expect mine to kind of go where it was, and it was a big thing. I was like, bloody hell, like, all these eyes watching me, and take it in my stride. But you, as long as you stay at the core of, no matter if it grows, or people have their 2 pence to say, if it helps you, whatever is helping you in your grief, regardless, to end on this, I think, yes, whatever's helping you in your grief, as long as it is not harmful to you or others around you, run with it. People might think, well, that's not very conventional, that's not how traditionally it's done. Like, if you want to start, I don't know, bloody painting canvases with your feet, I don't know, it helps you express your grief, whatever. Just do it. It's not harming you or anyone else. But if that's helping you release your pain, your grief, your love, why not run with it?
Yeah, and I love that there's options. There's personal, like you said, there's finding podcasts, there's books, there's Instagram accounts that are in the community. I always say, put your age or your relationship, even just in a Google search, your age or your relationship to someone who's passed, or even for yourself, and grief next to it, and you'll find so much. And like I'll always say as well, it's the intimidation that it's so melancholy, where it really isn't. I know one of my favorite bereavement nonprofits since we launched InvisiYouth is actually a British one called Once Upon a Smile. And I love what they do because they're so upbeat. Like their website is I always say they're perky. And I love it because they're like, well, we're perky because everyone who comes here it's about someone who's passed, but that person lived. So that's what we're focusing on. And it's age groups of people from different relationships, whether that's parents, really young kids, or young people who have passed, their siblings versus friend get-togethers. And it's knowing all of those distinctions and knowing that you can also go to these. There's another one, like Talk About Loss, I love online as well. They do virtual and physical meetups. And even now, like you said, they become so helpful, but it's having a friend or a sibling kind of join alongside you, which I would always need, because I would need kind of that buddy of a conversation. But it's social. It's not like everyone sits in a circle and goes, hello, my name is so-and-so, and these are the people who died in my life. Which would be like the worst social. That's what everyone imagines, because unfortunately film makes it seem like you're sitting in this like circle of doom in a basement in like the dungeon of sadness. And you're like, no, these people you're meeting out, if it's what pre-pandemic or even socially, it's like people are talking about movies they're seeing and just talking about fun things with one another. And then you just happen to know you're connected on that, even just subconsciously, which is super beneficial as like a tip for people in it, to know that there's so many. The biggest thing that I've always appreciated with having lost so many people in my life, from family members to friends to virtual friends, is knowing that I can when it's so sad and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to move past this. It was that emphasis of other people saying, I want you to intentionally do something that will make you happy. And that's not disregarding your grief or being shameful to someone who's passed. It's like, I just need to do something that'll make me smile. And for friends, that's super beneficial too. I'll always say, don't make the phone call or the hangout all about, I'm going to sit here and be the support that you need. It's like, I'm going to go over and we're going to watch a movie. And if we want to talk about it, cool. If not, you know, my presence is here. And that for people who are nervous to be that lender of support, that's such a big, my kind of before I ask our final question, the one I wanted to ask is phrases that have been good that you've heard from even your guests on Grief Gang that have been good to say. Everybody worries about, the only thing I know how to say is I'm sorry for your loss, and they don't know how to expand beyond that. So for young, I mean, obviously, if you said your grief began when you were 19 and you have guests at young ages as well. So what have been things that you felt, well, that would have been helpful to hear when I was younger, or things that somebody might have stepped up to say that you would say, these are good things. If you're nervous about how to help somebody, these are things that are helpful.
Oh, there's so much. There's some of my guests come with some absolute amazing things. Okay, I'll go from the angle of if you're supporting somebody, and things that I found are kind of really supportive, like from their perspective. The biggest thing that always comes to my mind is it's not the oh, let me know if I can do anything. It's the actual tangible ones of I'm going to take the dog off your hands today. Showing up, and this probably may speaks more to those very early days when you just don't know your head from your bottom, and you're like, what is going on? And the last thing you want to think about is walking the dog or doing a dinner, or I'm bringing you some lasagna, stick them in the freezer, I'm going to do your wash load and bring it back to you, and this and that. So and maybe that's sort of like my love language, because I'm acts of service. Acts of service is for me, and I like acts of service back. So I think it totally depends on what your person wants, and how I almost like to say as well, it's something I want to speak about too on my own podcast, is almost like love language and more grief languages. Like, what's your grief language? And I think it's a really interesting topic to sort of see what's like acts of service to you, but in a grief way. So yeah, actively kind of showing up. And it's that whole thing of, people think, oh, I don't want to be too much in their face, don't want to be that. You know your person, this is your friend, you know what they do and don't like. You've known them for however many long I've known them for. You know if they don't like 20 texts a day. You know if they don't like to be called generally. Like, I don't like to be called. If my friends call, I think, why are you calling me? You could just text me. And that's that. So you know if we want a long phone call or not. Maybe if I don't like people in my space and coming over and being like, right, I'm doing this for you. Or if I do really like that, and people just do it, saying what they're doing, what they're going to say, and being held accountable. So I think I would, and also as well, don't say if you don't mean it. Like, don't say, like, I'll come and do this, or I'll help you with this, if you don't mean it, and be fully active in and convicted in it. Another thing too that for me, and this was from my own dad, and kind of in terms of my own grief, and feeling really, I think there was a time in my life I was really upset that a lot of people, to me at the time, felt that they were moving on and mum was being left behind, and no one was really feeling that loss like I was feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time my dad said it to me, I remember being like, oh, that's really sad. And then upon reflection, I'm like, I don't know. I think I was moaning to him about something. I said, I feel like this person's moving on, blah, blah, blah. And he said, Amber, there will be nobody else on this earth other than me, you, and your brother who will feel that gaping hole of the loss of your mum like we do. There was no one else. We are her immediate family. No one will feel that gaping hole for the rest of their lives like we do. But how nice to know, you know, that we're all together in it and we're not alone in it, and we have us three together. And I was like, and I think in the moment I was like, no, that's not enough. It's not enough. Like, I don't want just us three. And then as time's gone on, it's kind of like, yeah, like it is kind of like we're just like the little gang. And I know that's not true of, like, there are people who do miss her, but knowing, and maybe if there's people watching here who think, no, I really am the only person who's missing that person in my life, there are other people who do, but there's something. Grief can feel so ugly, and in that, and when my dad said that to me, it felt ugly to me, because I was like, I don't want us three just to be the only ones who feel this. Like, she was too great of a woman to not. How can everyone else not feel like this? But when that grief is really, really ugly, and you think, oh my God, I see my like I said earlier, my grief is just a testament to the love that I had for my mum. So when it does get really, really ugly and really, really heavy, what helps me to pull me out of it, and whether it's toxic positivity, I don't know. I like to see it as, it's just a whole lot of love that my mum, I'm just really feeling the love of my mum and the want from the love from my mum. And it pulls me out 9 times out of 10. So yeah, I think I went on a tangent there, but yeah, that's
I love as you said it, because that is really, like you said, it's what was going to be my sort of tidbit to add on to that was always checking in the way that you're capable of. Let me know if you need anything. We'll say with chronic illness, you're putting more work on the person who's already working, and that's just unhelpful to everyone. So we'll always, especially in a chronic illness space or in a virtual space, I've lost friends who've lived in other states and countries. So I knew for the other friends that we had, there was not anything we could physically do because of the distance to help their families. And so it was I always remembered from my mom has lost her dad when she was 3, and he was an undertaker as well. And he was in his early, I think he was 34 when he passed away. So my mom always remembered from my grandmother, she would say, people were always there the first couple months, but there was a few people who would always send a card that was just small and simple. I'm just thinking of you, sending you love. And it was 6 months later, 10 months later, a year and a half later. And even now we'll always say, send the random message or find a random postcard that just says thinking of you, because I'll get that from friends of mine as well. I'll send that to friends of mine who've passed to their parents who I'm still close with, that I'll just randomly during the day, if it's something that makes me sad and I'm thinking of it going, God, I wish I could call that friend of mine again, or I could speak to them. And you're kind of overwhelmed in that anger or sadness, I'll be like, it reminded me of them. So then I'll turn it into a positive and go, I'm going to DM my other friend, or I'm going to DM their mom and just say, hey, I was thinking of so-and-so today, made me think of you, sending you a hug. How are things with either their other siblings, or how are you with work? And they'll always, like you said, 9 times out of 10 be like, oh, it's so great to hear from you. And it's like a positive reminder of their lost loved one as well. Yeah. So we'll always, those little, what you're capable of providing as those little reminders outside of how are you feeling, or what else let me know when I can do something and I'll then show up. It's those little things that kind of allow them to know that there's that other person there that's available to them when grief is so singular, which I think is really, really helpful. And kind of to end, our final question I always ask every guest is to give their one piece of advice for our listeners. So I wanted you to give, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to young adults, those teens and 20-somethings that are dealing with grief, that you think would help them in that stage of their life?
I was thinking back to the one thing that always comes up for me when I think about the young and bereaved, and it goes back into the feeling of feeling robbed, and we are robbed of futures with whoever it is that we've lost in our life. And as much as I say to welcome this feeling in, is don't be so angry at the world. Don't be so angry at the world and with everybody in it, because it's, I remember seeing another thing before, and it was like holding on to like anger and kind of, as I say, anger deserves to be felt, and especially in grief and when you lose someone so young. But sometimes holding on to that anger for a long time, like I did. I remember seeing something before that said, like holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting everyone else to die. And I was looking at everyone else just like, I'm really annoyed at the world and angry at all, but everyone else is like, la-di-da. And I'm like, you can all go away. Like, I'm pissed. And I just remember looking back to 19-year-old me, being so freshly being so angry at the world and thinking I wasted so much time just being so angry that there were so many beautiful moments in my life that just went by the wayside because of that anger. But that's not to say to not feel it, not everybody needs to have that anger. He's calling me again, decliner. Just me dad, don't worry. But yeah, and then also as well, just you don't have like two heads. You're not an alien. You're right. The feelings that you're feeling, you're not alone in them. Don't worry. There are people out there who get it and who have been through those feelings. It's just about finding them. And you think finding them might be harder than you think, but it's not. They are like, they're there. They're at your fingertips. You can find them. When you find them, it will feel like gold dust.
Yeah, I love that. Like you said, you're able to feel the joyful moments and sad moments and be able to tap into both at any time. And that's important for people to remember. And I love that. I feel like I'm excited that this is probably one of our lengthy podcasts, and I thoroughly enjoy that. I think it's a topic that people need to be able to digest this at any time and listen to parts of it. And I think that's really helpful. And I'm so excited to have had you as our special guest on this topic. And I had a lot of fun as well talking about grief. So I want everyone to be able to get to know you more and your podcast. So where can everybody find you and the Grief Gang podcast?
Yeah, of course. Yes, you can find me mainly on Instagram at the Grief Gang Podcast. I used to be the Grief Gang, and I added podcasts onto it like 2 months ago. I was like, people should know this is a podcast, so I added podcasts on there at the end. So the Grief Gang Podcast on Instagram, that's where I'm mainly active. I'm sometimes on Twitter just under the Grief Gang, and then you can listen to the Grief Gang Podcast on like major streaming platforms such as Apple, Spotify, Google, and we have a YouTube channel as well, which we're kind of like getting back into. But my main channel is Instagram. That's where I'm most active on, speaking with the community and getting involved there. But no, honestly, Dominique, thank you so much. I've had so much fun. And like you said, speaking about grief, it can be fun. You can have a whole lot of fun with it. And I'm so to have been a guest here today.
Oh, thank you. And like I said, everyone, we'll have it in the description notes so you guys can go find Amber and her podcast and the Grief Gang as well. So you'll be able to subscribe to that. And as always, make sure you subscribe to InvisiYouth Charities and social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at InvisiYouth, and our YouTube channel. You can watch the episodes and on all major podcast platforms, and subscribe there as well to listen to this podcast. So like I said, Amber, thank you so much for being on the show, and everyone get ready to listen to our final episode of season 3B coming up later. And I'm excited for everyone who's listened to this, and I will speak with all of you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.